last night. On a Nation Sports Show, we began our 2023 NFL regular season coverage. During last night's episode, it was the beginning of our favorite segment on the sports show as we started our prediction battles, as we gave our score predictions for the first slate of games happening this weekend in the National Football League. Tonight, on the day before the NFL season kicks off, Sirius XM host Lance Medow joins us to preview this year's NFL season. It's showtime.
From the gridiron to the court, talking all that is sport, breaking down the latest news, scores, and more. Welcome to our Nation Sports Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this exclusive interview that we will be conducting here on our Nation Sports Show. And joining us here in the next couple of minutes will be Sirius XM host Lance Medow. And Lance is one of the best sports broadcasters to be doing this to this very day. And I am your host for this evening, Stephen Wyand. And before we get started, you can follow us on Twitter at @ON_sports show, Facebook.com/Nation Sports Show, and where we are live on every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, 4 p.m. Pacific Time, YouTube.com/Our Nation Sports Show. And last week, Joey, joining me right now is my guy. He is a Washington football fan. Washington Commanders fan, I should say. He is one of my closest friends on this planet. And last week, him and Ezra did a great job on the sports show while I was at Dirty Honey and Guns N' Roses. And my brother, Joey, how's it going, man?
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Yes, it was an amazing show last week. With just me and Ezra becoming the new dynamic duo to do this sports show.
That's
and let
right.
me tell you, I mean, me and Ezra, we absolutely kicked it to the curb last week, man. I mean, we talk about the NFL predictions, our NFL playoff predictions, our Super Bowl predictions, hyping up our pick segment that just happened, well, last night actually. So,
yes, it did. And that will be one of many pick segments that we do. And my goodness, I mean, the NFL season is finally here. And last night we went live and we broke it all down and previewed on what's to come for the first slate of games in the National Football League starting on Thursday, September the 7th, highlighted by Kansas City hoisting yet another banner at Arrowhead Stadium when they take on the Detroit Lions. And, you know, Joey, we talked about this last night, how this Chiefs-Lions game reminds me of a previous Thursday night opener, and I believe it was during the 2017 opener when the New England Patriots took on the Kansas City Chiefs. And in that game, just when Patriot fans are ready to celebrate another Lombardi trophy being hoisted into Gillette Stadium, in comes Alex Smith at the time, who was the quarterback, and a young Patrick Mahomes, who was the backup at that time, along with Andy Reid. They came in there and they took command of that game. And that's why I say, in retrospect, that this Lions Chiefs game reminds me of that kind of game is because anything can happen in these games. Because, I mean, when you have a juggernaut like the Kansas City Chiefs, who have been to 3 out of 4 Super Bowls in the last 4 seasons, they are the defending champions heading into Thursday's game against Detroit, and just remarkable the run that Mahomes and Andy have had these last 4 seasons, getting 2 championship trophies. And Detroit is coming into this game as a very young, hungry team. And I think Detroit is out to prove that they are, this wasn't a fluke last year, because they were a Seattle Seahawks loss against the LA Rams from competing against Green Bay, obviously on the last game of the season. And one of those 2 teams would have gotten into the wild card, but that didn't happen because Seattle spoiled the Lions' party of possibly getting in. But Detroit came into that game last year with a perfect mentality. Okay, we can't be in the big dance. Well, then this is what obviously when Rodgers was with Green Bay, and their mentality was, ladies and gentlemen, our guest has arrived. He is one of my personal favorite sports hosts on the Sirius XM platform. You can hear him anywhere and everywhere. Like, this guy is so busy. I mean, Saturdays in the morning, Sundays in the morning, you can hear him on NFL radio. I mean, he is everywhere. He's with the Giants at the stadium during their games. I mean, he's calling games on Westwood One. You name it, he's everywhere. And ladies and gentlemen, I am here to present to you, and we are here to talk to the one and only Lance Medow. What's going on, Lance?
I'm doing great, guys. The check is in the mail after that illustrious intro there. Boy, you didn't miss a beat with respect to all the details.
Well, Lance, I think we can get down to the bottom of this. And man, oh man, as we have talked about on our show and as you have talked about on your respective shows, the NFL season is finally, it's here. It is here on September the 7th, with the Chiefs and the Lions being the first game, to start the season. And Lance, me and Joey were talking about this, and I want to get your opinion on this, because to me, this Lions-Chiefs game kind of reminds me of the Patriots-Chiefs game from, I believe that was the 2017 season, because everybody thought that the Patriots were going to just steamroll and they were going to, win the opening game. But as we all know, Alex Smith and Andy Reid and company, they followed all those plans and they beat the Patriots to start that season. Now, my question to you is, I mean, we're picking Kansas City, but it would not surprise us if Detroit somehow possibly can play a spoil. And what do you think will happen in this game?
Well, the Lions showed a lot late last season. They won 8 of their final 10 games. I thought the defense made huge strides. So we'll see whether or not the unit that Aaron Glenn was able to turn around will show up in week 1. Remember, you don't just roll over your play, even if it was impressive down the stretch. Because, I mean, this is a tall order for the Lions defense to go up against the Kansas City offense that, while it's had some personnel in and out, bottom line is there's a lot of continuity on that side of the ball. And even with Eric Bieniemy gone, Matt Nagy is back in the mix. And he obviously has a history with Kansas City before he went over to the Chicago Bears. So it's hard for me to pick the Lions in this game until we really see whether or not that defense can absolutely pick up where it left off. They have Aiden Hutchinson, but there's some movable parts on the back end of the defense, especially Jeff Okudah, who played well last season. They wound up trading him to the Atlanta Falcons. So I would say Kansas City clearly has the edge. It's hard to doubt a team that has been so good for so long. The Lions, they're just scratching the surface, guys, right? Last season was their opportunity to really quiet the skeptics, break out of their shell, and I think they did a nice job, but it's only been for half of a season. We have yet to even see them finish the job and make the playoffs. So you got to go with Kansas City getting a significant edge, but it could be a huge statement opportunity and momentum shifter for the Lions, even if they lose the game, to say, hey, we could go up against one of the best offenses in football, and we can certainly hang with them.
Right. Joey?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. And by the way, Lance, it's awesome finally getting to meet you. Stephen and Ezra have been able to say so much about you and how amazing and how awesome you are. Um, and I love tuning into your show whenever I get a chance to. So looking into this opening night game between the Chiefs and the Lions, I mean, if there's one thing that Detroit knew how to do last year, it was how to play spoiler, because Detroit, believe it or not, they were underdogs in just about every single game last year, but yet they were able to go out and get the job done on most of those occasions. So in your opinion, Lance, why do you think Detroit has been so undervalued over the past number of years, especially this past season?
Well, I think people are worried about it's the same old Lions, and I do appreciate the kind words, Joe. So thanks for that. I just think that people they can't take this Lions team seriously. They think last season was a flash. They don't have the strong enough track record. And in fairness, there's some validity behind that, right? I mean, Detroit, even if you go back to recent history, you'll see a good season, then a so-so season. You won't necessarily see a stretch of really good football. So that's why I think a lot of teams and a lot of people are dismissing this Detroit Lions team. But Dan Campbell has done a really nice job, as well as Aaron Glenn. And there's talent around Jared Goff. Like, I would not underestimate this Lions offense. I'm on Ross St. Brown. He's one of the best receivers in the game. Last season, he was a little bit banged up. Then you look at Josh Reynolds, another underrated player. They draft Sam Laporta at tight end, and they have several running backs that could do damage. So it's not as if they can't be in position to win the NFC North this season. And once again, carry over the momentum they had. That's not a stretch. I mean, I'm picking the Lions to win the North. You look at the rest of the division, Green Bay has Jordan Love and an extremely young roster. The Bears did a nice job filling out the talent around Justin Fields, but they have no track record, and their defense is missing right now somebody overwhelming to get after the quarterback. So it's really Minnesota. But remember, the Vikings won 11 games by one score, and their defense was at the bottom of the barrel. I think Brian Flores is going to help that unit, but there's no guarantee they're going to become a top 10 unit. And they also lost Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook on offense. So there's some movable parts on that side of the ball. When you take everything into consideration, there's a path for the Lions to win this division. It's not asking for an overwhelming charge up the mountain and take on this battle royale that would be impossible for them to solve.
That's an excellent point, because Detroit could absolutely win this division. I mean, Jared Goff last year showed up and showed out last year. And I look for Detroit to make some moves in this season. And speaking of making moves, especially in the offseason, I mean, the New York Jets were the talk of the offseason with their acquisition of former Green Bay Packers quarterback Aaron Rodgers. And Lance, I will say this, and in my opinion, I think the Jets can do decent this year, but I'm going to harpen back to what you said about Tom Brady and the Buccaneers from 2020 when Brady joined the Bucs. Everybody was on the Tampa bandwagon going, oh, Brady's going to lead this team to a Super Bowl, which eventually he did. But they were a wild card team. They didn't have the record that everybody thought they were going to have. And everybody is on this bandwagon of the Jets that, oh, Aaron Rodgers comes to New York. He can save the Jets. He's got, and as we all know, he has some of his favorite targets from Green Bay on there, including Cobb and Lazard. And obviously now they got the acquisition of former Vikings running back Dalvin Cook. And I mean, I think they could make the playoffs, but I'm not picking them solely because, oh, it's the brand new, leader of the team, supposedly. Because, I mean, you said that you didn't think that Brady and them were going to do it, but they did, but what is your thoughts on the Jets? Because everybody is just, they're on this train, of the Jets, and, oh, they're going to be great. What do you think?
Well, there is a lot of hype. There's no doubt about that. They're on Hard Knocks. I mean, everywhere you look, people are talking about the Jets. It's understandable, right. But very much like what Tom Brady did for Tampa Bay, which is what you were referencing, he elevated the offensive side of the ball because of his decision-making. Before you even got to the touchdowns and the production, it's the decision-making. And that's where Aaron Rodgers comes in. You're going from Zach Wilson and Mike White to Aaron Rodgers, one of the best touchdown to interception ratios in football. Now, my biggest concern for the Jets is the offensive line. Aaron, though, I think can overshadow and cover up some of the issues in the trenches if he gets rid of the football quickly. He makes changes at the line of scrimmage. There's things that he sees that the defense presents that Zach Wilson wasn't doing last season. And even if I say he does that every other game, so even if we're talking about it happens 10 times during the course of the season, and I think that's on the low side, you add up what 10 things like that can do to save a turnover, help the defense in terms of field position, that's going to add up. So from that standpoint, and knowing that the defense was astounding last season, I mean, that group did not miss a beat, and they bring back the core. I'm very high on the Jets. So I think the hype and the buzz is deserving, and I think they will deliver. And I think they could go so far to win that division because Buffalo, keep in mind, has some movable parts and changes. Von Miller's out for the first 4 games. They're an aging defense. They're a good defense, but a lot of the guys are up there in age and have been banged up. And Sean McDermott is now calling plays. So you take all of those things into consideration, the Jets have a pathway to, I think, live up to the billing because they're one of the most balanced teams in the AFC East. All 4 of those teams have really good defenses. I don't know if all 4 have offenses with Aaron Rodgers at the control that you feel really good about them. Tua, his health, can he stay durable throughout the season? That's a fair question. Mac Jones reuniting with Bill O'Brien. We'll see whether or not they can work their magic. And Josh Allen is coming off a season where he had an elbow injury and he had 29 turnover-worthy plays and a lot of mishaps in the red zone. I'm not saying that that's going to be duplicated, but the more and more you look at the AFC's landscape, the more and more I may have less questions about the Jets than really anybody else. So I'm a big believer that this team is balanced on paper, and that is going to carry over to the football field.
Excellent.
That's a
Excellent.
very, and yeah, that's a very interesting point, Lance. But not to disagree with you because I know that you're one of the head honchos when it comes to the sports world, and you obviously know everything that you're talking about. But there have been times over the years, and I've done my research itself, that whenever a team looks good on paper, it's like they really go out and prove that they don't have that team chemistry. They don't really show that those superstars are really out to, I guess you can say, show their potential, I guess you can say. So, with that being said, do you think this Jets team can show that team chemistry? Because, I mean, think of the talent that you have on both sides of the ball. You got, of course, Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. You got Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook at running back. You got Garrett Wilson over there at wide receiver. On the defensive side of the ball, you got Sauce Gardner, who is quickly proven that he is one of the best cornerbacks in the history of the game right now. So with all that being said, since this Jets team looks so good on paper, what do you think the team chemistry is, or what do you think, in your opinion, how much time do you think it'll take for the Jets to show that team chemistry? I'm not
that concerned about team chemistry. I think you bring up a fair point. I'll give you an example that spells out what you're talking about. 2011, the Philadelphia Eagles brought in a lot of firepower on both sides of the ball. And if you remember, Vince Young in training camp referred to them as the dream team because you look at who they brought in at pass rusher. Then they had Nnamdi Asomugha and Asante Samuel. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I mean, it was a lot of new faces, okay? But here's the thing about the Jets, Joe. The Jets, Nathaniel Hackett, their offensive coordinator, has history with Aaron Rodgers. They were together for a few years in Green Bay. He was with Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb. Garrett Wilson is new, but from what I saw in the preseason, doesn't look like Aaron's having trouble being on the same page. They played the Giants. He threw a beautiful ball to him in the corner of the end zone on a fade, and it was on point. The offensive line is a question mark whether the guys are coming back or not. I'll give you that. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you have the same coordinator. And, I mean, who really is new on the defensive side of the ball? Sauce, Quinnen Williams. I mean, all of these guys that you're going to mention, they were there last season. So you're carrying over a lot of chemistry. I really don't think it matches what a number of other teams have done in previous off seasons where you see an influx of so much new talent that did not play together. And then maybe on top of that, you're adding a new coordinator into the mix. Not only do you bring Aaron Rodgers over, you bring him over with his former offensive coordinator. That's going to go a long way to limit and shorten the bridge that you were hitting on that you're concerned about? Because I think there's already embedded chemistry in this roster and on this team.
Yeah, that is a very solid point. I mean, since you put it that way, and not only is he reunited with his offensive coordinator, he also has one of his star receivers that he had in Green Bay last year, that of course being Alan Lazard. So, yeah, you make a really solid point there, Lance. I agree with that.
I got you to turn the corner. Look at this. We're pulling 180s over the course of this show.
That's right. And you talked about the Buffalo Bills, and the Buffalo Bills last year were one of the most heavily favored teams to come out of the AFC and represent the AFC conference in the Super Bowl. But like you mentioned, the elbow injury that Josh Allen had and the turnover ratios that Allen had was very critical in critical situations that caused Buffalo to be taken out of the playoffs by Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. And it was remarkable, the story that Buffalo went through last year, especially with DeMar Hamlin, and how remarkable the recovery that he made after taking that violent hit and going into cardiac arrest and making a full recovery. And the fact that Hamlin is coming back to football, and that's a wonderful story and a wonderful testament to the strength that DeMar has as an individual to continue to play this great game, this great sport. And going into this season, I think the Buffalo Bills have a lot of pressure on them because they've only been to one championship game with Josh Allen under center, and they got all these great weapons at receiver. Stephon Diggs is one of the best receivers in the game to play the game of football, and Gabriel Davis is a very nice side piece at the number 2, with Diggs right there on the outside. And so what do you think, Lance, as far as the Bills is concerned? Like, is this, like, I know a lot of these guys are young, but the Buffalo has to be thinking that we have to start winning here soon, because Mahomes has been to 3 out of 4 Super Bowls, won 2. Allen's only been to 1 conference championship game, was 13 seconds away from going back to the conference championship game 2 seasons ago. And with that being said, do you think Buffalo, is this the year they need to win?
Well, I do think windows in the NFL, to your point, Stephen, close very quickly. And I think that's what you're hitting on, because you see the last few years, the Bills have been consistent. So there's no doubt about it. They can't just assume we keep rolling it back and then finally the ball's going to bounce our way. So yes, there is some urgency. Also, the division has vastly improved. There's no gimme game in the division. Forget about who the Bills play outside the AFC East. But we were talking about a lot of these teams. New England has one of the best defenses in football. And Mac Jones, I think, is going to bounce back with Bill O'Brien next to him. The Dolphins have a balanced team. Vic Fangio is now their defensive coordinator. We talked about the Jets. The Bills, they're not just going to roll things out and say, okay, we're going to go 6-0 in the division. It's not going to work like that. So you're going to be challenged within the division. You also play the NFC East this year. So that's going to be a challenge in terms of outside the conference. And you look at last season where Josh Allen had the elbow injury, 29 turnover-worthy plays by Pro Football Focus, tied for the worst number in the NFL. And you can tell me all you want, the injury impacted that. And he tries to do turning something out of nothing because sometimes there's no help. I don't buy that. I think a quarterback can be held to a standard where if he makes mistakes, whether he's Josh Allen or he's Geno Smith, you can still question whether or not he should throw that football regardless of what's around him. That still comes back to the quarterback getting rid of the football and knowing maybe I should throw the ball away, maybe I should slide, or maybe I should try to press the envelope. So, I mean, that to me is irrelevant in terms of the argument of who is around him or what he's asked to do within the offense. Decisions are decisions, and you could put them out on an island to determine whether or not they're good or bad. I'm not down on the Bills. I like the roster. I'm just looking at teams around them getting better and taking into consideration the competition is much more fierce, and you can't just assume that we're penning them in and penciling them in to win the AFC East. I have the Jets winning the division. I have the Bills getting a wild card. So that right away goes to show you that it's not a lock for them to automatically roll back the tape and even get to the AFC Championship game. I think a lot is going to depend on how this Bills team holds up. Because last season, Von Miller got hurt, Jordan Poyer got hurt, Micah Hyde got hurt. You mentioned the unfortunate circumstance with DeMar Hamlin. Does Leonard Floyd prove to be an X factor? I mean, he's gotten sacks. They brought him in this offseason. Gregory Rousseau. If Von Miller misses time, the point is, who's going to step up? Last season, they had nobody who stepped up in place of Von Miller. So it's fair for me to question the outlook of the Bills. I'm not saying they're going to have a bad season. I'm not saying they're missing the playoffs, but I'm just not taking the assumption that they're just going to have red carpet treatment and go automatically to the AFC Championship game. They need to prove they can stay healthy, and Josh Allen needs to prove that he can make better decisions. And if he's going to run 120 times again this season, you get concerned about whether or not he's going to have an elbow injury again. You look at Lamar Jackson, look at Jalen Hurts, look at all of these elusive running quarterbacks. Durability is a problem. It's fair to question that with Josh Allen.
Yes, it is. Joey?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point you bring up there, Lance. So, switching gears to another conference, I'm looking at the AFC North here. Everybody has pretty much figured out that's pretty much going to be a two-team race this year between Cincinnati and Baltimore. And I can understand where they're coming from because Cincinnati, they definitely have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball with Joe Burrow at quarterback and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins at wide receiver, and of course Joe Mixon in the backfield. And the offensive line has really improved from, in my opinion, they have improved quite a bit since that year they went to the Super Bowl and got embarrassed by Aaron Donald and the Los Angeles Rams. But then again, I also look at Baltimore because one of the questions that was going into the offseason was, is Lamar Jackson finally going to get that long-term deal? Is Lamar Jackson going to stick around with the Baltimore Ravens, or is he going to look to go elsewhere and get that long-term deal that he's really been anticipating? So, and we've seen athletes in various sports get signed to these multi-million, big-time dollar deals, and some of them actually go out and prove that they're worth it. But then others, it's like, why even sign that contract? Because you're not even doing anything to help this organization because of that big time deal. So, Lance, my question to you is, now that Lamar Jackson has got his long-term deal, do you think he's going to be able to go out and potentially guide Baltimore to another AFC North crown? Or do you think Cincinnati is going to just do what they can to go back or to be back on top?
Well, I think both of those teams will ultimately get into the playoffs, and I can see it coming down to the wire. I'm not questioning Lamar Jackson's work ethic. To me, it hasn't really been an issue in terms of Lamar not putting the work in. It's been an issue of Lamar staying healthy. Because once again, it goes back to what I was talking about with Josh Allen. When you run your quarterback so much, he's going to take some extra hits unless he is of the mindset, I'm just going to slide. And we know Lamar loves to fight for sometimes that extra yardage because he's so elusive. Todd Monken is now the new offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. It's not Greg Roman anymore. Greg Roman and Lamar had been together. Greg Roman was formerly the Niners offensive coordinator, where they ran the ball very effectively, if you recall, with Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick. I like what Todd could very well have in store for Lamar. I think the new play caller, on top of the arrival of Odell Beckham, Zay Flowers through the draft, Rashad Bateman, who's another one, got talent, needs to stay healthy. We know what Mark Andrews could do at tight end. And they have a variety of different running backs, including J.K. Dobbins. Lamar has the talent around him that if he could stay healthy and they open up the playbook a little bit more, and I think they will because they have the weaponry, and they involve a little bit more of the passing attack. And by the way, this doesn't mean that Lamar has to throw 50-yard bombs down the field. Take what the talent around you has to offer and let them get yardage after the catch. For example, I think Zay Flowers is going to be an electric weapon. You watch Zay Flowers in college, here's a guy, Lamar, get rid of the ball, let him do the rest of the heavy lifting. Those are the things that I think Todd Monken is going to scheme accordingly, and that will reflect in Lamar's passing numbers. I like the Ravens a lot. I think this team has an opportunity to make this a very, very special campaign. It all obviously operates on Lamar staying healthy. I never go into a season hoping a quarterback is going to get hurt. And we don't know. That's always a wild card. But I'm telling you, if this Ravens team stays healthy with Lamar at the controls and the new offensive play caller, there's no reason why they can't push to win the division and maybe make a very deep postseason run, because this team, between their run game and their passing attack, they are balanced, and that defense has been pretty much a straight line since John Harbaugh has been there. So I have no reason to doubt the Ravens' defense and say that they won't be able to keep their team in games.
Interesting.
And finally, to wrap up the AFC side of things, the AFC West. I mean, the Kansas City Chiefs have ran with this division since Patrick Mahomes has been the starting quarterback. 5 AFC championship games in a row, 3 Super Bowls, 2 championship rings under their belts. And this season, I have no doubts in my mind that Mahomes and Chiefs and company will repeat as AFC West champions. But what's interesting to me, Lance, about the AFC West is the rest of the teams. I mean, Vegas and Denver and the Chargers. I mean, with the addition of Sean Payton as the head coach for the Denver Broncos, and obviously Russell Wilson, being there at quarterback, in his second year. And my question to you is, Lance, how do you think the rest of the teams in the AFC West will do? And, also as well, how will the Chargers do? Can they rebound after one of the most epic collapses last year, a 27-0 lead against the Jaguars. The Jaguars. And
Jaguars.
just blowing that game. It was just remarkable how Jacksonville, who just recently won the AFC South Division, they came back and beat the Chargers and on a last-second game-winning field goal. And those are losses that teams do not recover from. And it's just interesting to me how the AFC West is stacked, because you got Jimmy Garoppolo coming to Vegas now after leaving San Francisco, and Denver with Wilson and Peyton obviously being the coach. Like, this division is interesting because we don't know how Denver's going to do with Peyton as the coach versus last year when Nathaniel Hackett was the head coach. So what do you think of the AFC West side of things?
I'm very high on the Denver Broncos. I think Sean Payton is going to do wonders for that team. And you just look at what he did in New Orleans. I know a lot of people are down on Russell Wilson, but Sean took guys like Trevor Siemian and Jameis Winston and Ian Book and tried to make that team operational. So if he could do that, and they went 9-8, for example, in his last season in New Orleans, why should I not have faith that he can get Russell Wilson and that offense back on track? Their defense was great last season. The Broncos and the Jets were almost mirror images of one another. Really good defenses, suspect offenses. So you look at both of those teams this year, because of either a new quarterback, a new play caller, or a new head coach, the outlook for the offense is very positive. And I think he is going to have a significant impact. I think Sean is going to do for Denver what Doug Peterson did for Jacksonville last season, and also what Doug Peterson did for Trevor Lawrence, because here's a guy that played that position. He knew exactly how to play into the strengths of Trevor Lawrence. I think Sean, he's been around the league long enough. He's worked with a variety of quarterbacks. He's got an excellent track record. And this may be one of the best defenses he has as a complementary facet to his offense than anything that New Orleans has been able to showcase. So when you take all that into consideration, I like the Broncos making a charge into the playoffs this year. I think he could have that quick of an impact. Javonte Williams hopefully is fully healthy. Love him in the backfield. I know the Broncos receivers are a little bit banged up, but Jerry Jeudy's not going to miss a lengthy period of time. Looks like a few weeks with a hamstring injury. So fingers crossed that group holds up durability-wise. I think he's going to put guys in a creative spot to flourish, and I think this Denver team is going to be a very tough out. As far as the other two teams are concerned, I wouldn't read too much into how the Chargers season ended last year. Remember, you have some new faces coming to the locker room. I don't think they're moping around and feeling sorry for themselves. There's no doubt about it. It was not pretty how the year ended, but they got a lot of height. They got a lot of size around Justin Herbert. They have a really good offensive line. The Chargers, the problem I have with putting faith in them is every year we go in, we look at their roster, we have a love fest with them, and then they drop like flies. That team cannot stay healthy. I don't know what it is. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were banged up last season, in and out of the lineup. Then it was years where Joey Bosa and Derwin James on defense. They never have the core operate where there's full health. The other thing that I wonder is Brandon Staley, who's their head coach, you know, he loves to go for it on fourth down. And there
Yes,
were
he
times
does.
where I would watch them play
Yes, he
the
does.
Chiefs, and I would say to myself, Brandon, take the 3 points. Get the points on the board early, and then if you want to be aggressive down the stretch of the game, when it's worth taking a chance, do it. But in the first quarter, on the very first possession, sometimes I feel like that has come back to bite them. So how does he navigate things like that? Kellen Moore is going to come over. I think he's going to help that offense. Because I think you look at what he did with Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, they had one of the top offenses in football. But if Kellen doesn't have all of his weapons at his disposal, I wonder whether or not the ceiling for that team is through the roof. And then the Raiders, Jimmy Garoppolo, you know what you're getting out of him. Whether or not he could stay healthy is the million-dollar question. I'm worried about the defense. The Raiders have not had a pass rush in the last few seasons, and you can't tell me that it's going to be the Max Crosby show and everybody else will just fill in the void left behind. That's not going to happen. You know, Chandler Jones, I don't think delivered last season. We'll see what happens this year. And their secondary, they revamped it a little bit, but not a lot of proof that that group is going to turn things around. And look at the division. Kansas City, we talked about Denver's improved offense. Justin Herbert and the Chargers, much like the AFC East, you're not going to have a night off. I'm not sold on this Raiders defense. That concerns me. And Josh Jacobs, who is now coming back, he had a huge workload last season. I think they're going to have to utilize Zamir White a little bit more this season to alleviate what they're putting on the shoulders of Jacobs. And you wonder when a guy shows up right before the season starts and was not at camp. Remember, Saquon Barkley was at camp. Josh Jacobs wasn't. Does it now take a few extra weeks for him to get his legs back under him? That's another dynamic that you got to take it into consideration and watch here moving forward.
That's right. And real quick, Joey, to the AFC South things. I mean, Jacksonville last year made an unbelievable rally. You know, after having that losing streak, losing several games in a row, they go on this remarkable winning streak and they overtake the Tennessee Titans to dethrone them and beat them in the last game of the season to be the AFC South champions. Do you think, Lance, that that Jacksonville and company can repeat as AFC South champions, or can Tennessee finally make some splashes? Because as we all know, they got DeAndre Hopkins at wide receiver, and DeAndre is a hell of a talent and one of the best receivers to play in the game of the National Football League. And obviously, Derrick Henry is one of the best pound for pound running backs in the NFL. And the biggest question for me with the AFC South is, can Houston make, I wouldn't say a playoff run, but can they make some splashes going into the season, because they were so aggressive in the draft? And as we all know, with the Indianapolis Colts and the status of Jonathan Taylor and all the rumors that are going around about where's he going to go to, where's he going to, you know, what team is he going to end up on? I mean, the AFC South to me is a 2-team race between Jacksonville and Tennessee. Your thoughts?
And I would agree. I do think Houston and Indy are intriguing. They both have rookie starting quarterbacks. And Anthony Richardson, remember, he's an effective runner. And there's more questions about his passing game than what he could do from an athletic standpoint. So Colts could be a very interesting team to watch. There's some big receivers on that team. Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, the tight ends. Even if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play a full season or whatever happens to him moving forward, you're going to have to pay attention to Richardson taking off from the backfield. So I wouldn't be surprised if that Indy offense makes some noise and the defense is still intact with Gus Bradley as the defensive coordinator. Shane Steichen inherited him from the previous regime. I'm much higher on Indy doing some damage, to answer your question, than Houston. I think Houston, we got to see some continuity for once. To your point, they were very aggressive in the draft, but you got a lot of new faces on that roster, and you have a rookie quarterback.
Right.
And you have a new staff in D'Amico Ryans. I'm new. I keep naming. It's a lot of newness. You know, it goes back to what we were talking about, chemistry with the Jets. But what about chemistry with the Houston Texans before we worry about questioning the Jets? There's a lot of different pieces in play. So I do think it's going to come down to Jacksonville and Tennessee. Jaguars impressed me last season, and I thought Doug Peterson would have a positive impact. Why? Because, once again, he does wonders for quarterbacks. There was a lot of talent around Trevor Lawrence, and they took advantage of a Tennessee team that lost 7 in a row to end the season. So you can't dismiss that. You have to keep that into consideration. It took an ultimate collapse by the Titans for the Jaguars to walk through the door and win the division. But much like Detroit, I think Jacksonville will be far more balanced this season as opposed to digging themselves out of an early hole early in the year. So that should make the difference. Tennessee, the problem I have with Tennessee is DeAndre Hopkins is no youngster. Ryan Tannehill's no youngster, and neither is Derrick Henry. So can those three guys hold up? Because there's question marks for the rest of that Tennessee receiving core. And we saw that when they traded A.J. Brown to Philly. They were hoping for somebody to rescue them, and that was not happening. Robert Woods didn't do it. Neither did Treylon Burks. So does Hopkins play? Does he stay in the lineup? And does he draw the defense towards him where now Derrick Henry is loosened up a little bit in the box? Hopkins has to stay in the lineup. Their defense gets Harold Landry back. He was a much-needed boost because they lost him for the entire year. He went down right before the season starts. But once again, it's an older team. It's a team that's been together for a little bit. You just wonder, are the gods up in the football world going to cooperate to keep that team healthy? Jacksonville's a little bit younger, a little bit more pep in their step, and I love what Doug Peterson did on the offensive side of the ball. So I would have to give the Jaguars the edge, even though Tennessee, in fairness, has set the standard in this division. But last season, with the way they played in the second half of the season, I think it proved to us that you can't just all of a sudden assume when you have a veteran team that you're going to roll it back every single year. It doesn't work like that in football. 7 new playoff teams in the playoffs for the NFL in each of the last 3 years. You can't expect the same 14 teams to all of a sudden just knock on the door and get back in. Doesn't work like that.
That is excellent. Excellent. Joey?
Very excellent. So I'm switching gears now. We're going towards the NFC, and obviously one of the biggest news that broke just not too long ago was the fact that former number 3 overall first-round pick for the San Francisco 49ers, Trey Lance, got traded from the 49ers to the Dallas Cowboys. And, of course, the 49ers got a couple of picks in return. But I remember before this trade went down, Trey Lance was being interviewed by reporters saying, well, I don't want to be a third-string quarterback. I mean, I know I could be a much better quarterback if I just go out there and stay healthy and prove myself. I know I'm better. I know I'm better than being a third-string quarterback. So I don't want to go to a place where I can be a third-stringer. But yet, not even a few days later, he goes to Dallas via this trade where, believe it or not, he's going to be a third-string quarterback behind Dak Prescott and Cooper Rush. So my question to you, Lance, is what are your thoughts on this trade of Trey Lance going from San Francisco to Dallas? And what sort of impact and what sort of leadership do you think Trey Lance could bring to this Dallas Cowboys team?
Well, I don't know how much leadership he's going to bring. I mean, this is Dak's team. And I don't think the Cowboys are worried about a leadership standpoint that he brings to the table because, once again, as you mentioned, and I think that's accurate, he is the third-string quarterback. He hasn't gotten past Cooper Rush. Trey Lance doesn't know the Dallas offense. How does he walk into Dallas, snap his fingers, and become Dak Prescott's backup? So he starts as the third stringer. He's a developmental quarterback, and we'll see what happens. I like the move for Dallas. I think it was good value. You gave him a 4th-round pick for a player that is only 2 years removed as being the number 3 overall pick. He's still young. He still has potential. He's got a small sample size as a starter. So the jury is still very much out there. And they have him under their control for the next 3 years because he's got 2 years left on his rookie deal and the 5th-year option. Now, they're not going to exercise the 5th-year option and pay him $25 million or whatever the astronomical number is. But here, they could always work out some type of a new deal if he wants to stay in Dallas. But you still have him for 23 and 24 on a rookie deal. And the Niners paid him a roster bonus already. So Dallas has him on the roster this year, and the Niners are essentially paying his salary. So from a value standpoint, I think it was a very wise and smart move for the Dallas Cowboys. But I think the Niners should have held on to him. He wasn't burning a hole in that roster. He should have stayed in San Francisco as the third stringer, given the fact that they gave up 3 first-rounders for him, and San Francisco has not been able to stay healthy at the quarterback position. When was the last time the Niners got through an entire season with one quarterback? It happened once with Jimmy Garoppolo, and that was in 2019. Yep. Every other year that Kyle Shanahan has been the head coach, he's gone to the depth chart. So that's more of a reason why Trey Lance held more value staying in San Francisco than going to Dallas. Also, the chances of Trey Lance playing this year are higher if he would have stayed with the Niners than gone to the Cowboys. Why? Because once again, Niners quarterbacks have not proven to stay healthy. Brock Purdy got hurt in the NFC Championship game. Sam Darnold has not been somebody that has held up over the course of his career. I would have been more than happy if I was John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan to keep Trey Lance on the roster. That's what should have happened. Clearly it didn't. So it's fair to say the Niners gave up overwhelming amount of value to get no return on that draft pick. Trey Lance is not a bust because he was a product of circumstance in San Francisco. It wasn't because he played horrendously. It was because he barely played and then he got hurt and somebody else took his job. And that sometimes happens in life. But Dallas is not bringing him in to threaten Dak. They're bringing him in as another insurance policy to develop. And if you were to say, I give up a 4th rounder to grab a 1st round pick not that far removed, from a value standpoint, to me, it's a no-brainer.
And you hit all of this
Interesting.
on the head on your show that when I was listening to over the weekend, and you were just dead on accurate with your opinions on this trade. And that's the biggest question for me. Can Brock Purdy stay healthy? Because like you said on your show, he has not played a full season yet. And this is his first starting full season, and we'll see if he can be healthy. And switching over to the NFC East side of things, as we all know, the Philadelphia Eagles last year, one of the hottest teams in the National Football League, led by a young rising star in quarterback and Jalen Hurts. He took Philadelphia on the verge of a 2nd Lombardi trophy, and Philadelphia had a great game with Kansas City in the Super Bowl last year. Ultimately, Mahomes was just too much. 13 of 14 in the second half, only 1 incompletion, and the Chiefs held off Philadelphia, and they won the Super Bowl. And the Cowboys made a run last year. They got beat by San Francisco in the divisional round, and the Giants made a playoff berth for the first time in several years, with Daniel Jones finally getting to start a playoff game. And Saquon Barkley, thankfully, stayed healthy the entire year last year. And my question to you, Lance, is who do you think will win the NFC East, and can Philadelphia get back to the Super Bowl?
Well, my favorite statistic is this division's been so crazy that nobody's been able to repeat their success. We haven't had back-to-back NFC East champs since the Eagles won 4 in a row from 2001 to 2004. So if you apply my math to your question, Stephen, then I would say the Eagles are not going to win the division because they're the reigning NFC East champs. Yes. And we haven't seen that happen in quite some time. So I like the Dallas Cowboys winning this division. And I also think that this could be a very special season for the Cowboys because, as we're discussing, the NFC is wide open. Normally, we talk about 6, 7 teams you feel really good about. You could maybe name 3 that are legitimate track record contenders to get to the Super Bowl, meaning we've seen it happen multiple years. They make playoffs, they get close. Everybody else doesn't apply under that label. It's Dallas, Philly, and San Francisco. That's it. So when you look at the Cowboys, like the Eagles, in fairness, bringing back the bulk of their rosters. Less change in Dallas, though. Dan Quinn's still running the defense. Kellen Moore's gone, but Mike McCarthy is still the head coach. He's going to be more involved in the play calling. I like the addition of Brian Schottenheimer. Schottenheimer actually was with Geno Smith a few years back in Seattle when not Geno Smith, Russell Wilson. When Russell Wilson had a really strong start to the season. The second half wasn't as good, but he's an underrated offensive coordinator. I think he's going to add his own spin to what Mike McCarthy wants to implement now that Kellen Moore is not there. But they added Brandon Cooks, and I think the Cowboys missed Amari Cooper when they got rid of him and didn't really have a suitable replacement. Well, in comes Brandon Cooks. You know Tony Pollard is a versatile back. I didn't bring up Michael Gallup and C.D. Lamb are still there. You got playmakers on defense at every level, including Micah Parsons, who disrupts games. It's one of the most balanced teams you're going to find in football. So I like the Cowboys winning the division. I like the Eagles grabbing a wild card. The difference between Philly and Dallas is Philly's got a new defensive coordinator because their former DC is now in Arizona. Sean Desai comes in. He's not an internal promotion. Could the Eagles defense struggle a little early? Sure. Why? Because Sean Desai is now putting in a new scheme, and maybe the guys are not 100% used to it. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it's possible. They still have an overwhelming amount of depth up front, even though they lost Javon Hargrave. And C.J. Gardner-Johnson, I know, left to go to the Lions, but Reed Blankenship, who filled in for him, played a lot last season. So the Eagles, they're so good at drafting players a year or two prior to get ready for guys they're going to lose so that they're ahead of the curve. I would find it very hard to believe if the Cowboys or the Eagles take a huge step back. The only way that happens is you're talking about massive injuries across the board to these rosters. They're too strong. They're too consistent. But if you had to choose between both, I like Dallas winning the division because I do think there's a little bit more continuity with respect to them. And remember, the Cowboys were with the Eagles every step of the way in both head-to-head matchups. People don't reference this. Dak did not play the first game. Cooper Rush played. They went down early. Cooper actually helped them rally, and they lost a relatively close affair. Who knows what would happen if Dak plays? And in the second game, in fairness, Jalen Hurts didn't play. Okay, so maybe that balances things out. With Gardner Minshew, it was an offensive clinic, and Dallas won a tight affair. And you know what it came down to? Came down to the Cowboys defense creating some turnovers. Miles Sanders, I believe, coughed up the ball, and they got to Gardner Minshew a little bit. And once again, that to me is a product of this really hungry and aggressive Dallas defense. So I'd give the Cowboys the edge over the Eagles there.
All right, Joey.
That's a very interesting point. So, of course, I want to talk about my favorite NFC East team for just a minute. That, of course, is the Washington Commanders. Now, I've been a Washington fan ever since I first started watching sports. And I know we haven't had history on our side as of late because we've had so many head coaches, we've had so many starting quarterbacks, we've had so many coaching changes, players leaving, players getting hurt, old veterans coming in and not playing like they're worth it anymore. So, I mean, I would say my question is, now that Washington made a huge stride in the offseason by not really getting a player, but an offensive-minded coach like Eric Bieniemy, I mean, obviously, me being a Washington fan, I would love to see Washington just soar above all the competition. But I know that that's personally not going to happen. I know it's not. Because Washington is still, I would say, a couple years away from actually becoming a threat as long as Bieniemy continues to work that offense. And one of the main stories going into the offseason was the fact that some of the players were complaining to head coach Ron Rivera, saying that Bieniemy was being too strict. He was being too tough. He was being too aggressive on them. So what is your opinion, Lance, as to what Eric Bieniemy could potentially bring to Washington? And I would say, how far away do you think Washington is as long as they keep the players intact from making a strong impact?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't read too much into the whole Eric Bieniemy too hard on the players because I think that's natural when a new offensive coordinator comes in. He has a different personality, so it takes some getting used to. They made a big stink out of Patrick Mahomes and Eric Bieniemy, if you recall, sometimes having their issues on the sideline, and all the Kansas City Chiefs did is win. And you would want Eric Bieniemy in your facility because Eric Bieniemy knows how to win, given who he's been around for the last decade in Kansas City. So that's going to, I think, do wonders for Washington. I think the Commanders are a very sneaky team. I like what Eric Bieniemy could do for Sam Howell. Sam Howell is an excellent athlete. He's got mobility. I think he's going to add a new dimension to that offense. And he's going into an environment, and this is really what it makes Washington attractive. Most young quarterbacks go to teams that are not good. And that means that they have offensive line issues. They don't have very many weapons. Justin Fields, right? He goes to a Chicago team that was barren. And now the Bears have started to improve the roster. Howell is walking into a team where he's got three really good receivers in Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, and Curtis Samuel. Two nice backs in Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. If Logan Thomas can stay healthy at tight end, that's another weapon that could be a nice insurance policy. And an offensive line that it remains to be seen, but you can't blame Washington. They made some changes. They bring in Nick Gates from the Giants, who's a real tough SOB, and Andrew Wiley from the Kansas City Chiefs, who is with Eric Bieniemy. All of those things I mentioned are promising. And Washington has one of the best defensive fronts in football. All 4 of those former first-round picks, and hopefully Chase Young will be healthy. I'm a little bit nervous about the linebackers and the secondary, whether it be the youth or inexperience or the up and down play. But I do think that Washington offense is going to score points. I think Eric Bieniemy is going to be creative. I think the players are going to buy into what he's selling, and they're going to be a thorn in the side of the rest of the NFC East. It actually would not surprise me when we see who wins the NFC East title. It could be the team that fares the best against the Washington Commanders, because I could see the Commanders. I'm not saying they're making the playoffs, but I could see them influencing the NFC East champion, because for all we know, they may sweep one of those 3 other teams in head-to-head matchups. They may split at least with one of those other teams, and that could very well put that team that loses to Washington in a tough spot. So I think Washington's going to be a tough out. I don't think they're that far away. I think we're going to see how far they've come based on what that offense could do this season.
Excellent. And we keep alluding to the playoffs, and I absolutely love this because you have given some of your playoff teams, that you think are going to make the playoffs. And Lance, for you in the AFC and the NFC, whatever order you want to go in, who do you have from the top to the bottom making the playoffs this season?
Well, in the AFC, I like the Chiefs clearly in the AFC West, and I'll take Denver as a wild card based on what I said earlier. So 2 teams out of that division. The Jaguars winning the AFC South. In the North, I like the Bengals winning the division, the Ravens getting in as a wild card, and the Steelers just missing out. I'm very high on Kenny Pickett, but I think we got to see more out of that offensive line, and Pickett and company really start to put it together. It may take an additional season. And then in the East, I like the Jets winning the division and the Bills as a wild card. So the Bills, the Ravens, and the Broncos is my 3 wild cards. The Jets, the Bengals, the Jaguars, and the Chiefs as the 4 division winners. In the NFC, I like the Cowboys, as I mentioned earlier, winning the East. The Eagles coming out as a wild card. The Lions winning the NFC North, just 1 team out of that division. In the South, I like the Saints winning the division. And I like the Atlanta Falcons getting a wild card. I'm very high on Atlanta.
Wow.
They're a sneaky team. Arthur Smith is going to try to duplicate what he did in Tennessee. Bijan Robinson is going to be his Derrick Henry. Desmond Ridder doesn't have to be amazing. Just make good decisions and hand the ball off. And he's got Drake London and Kyle Pitts. Ryan Nielsen was brought over as the Saints assistant, who's now their defensive coordinator at Atlanta. And he brought a lot of powerful guys up front, whether it be David Onyemata, Kaden Ellis. I love Jesse Bates at safety, who comes over from Cincinnati. Don't sleep on this Falcons team. And then in the West, Niners winning the division and the Seahawks getting in as a wild card. If there's any team to never overlook, it's Seattle. People talk about Mike Tomlin and the Steelers. Look at what Pete Carroll's done with Seattle. Since 2012, they've had 1 losing record, and they've consistently been in the playoffs. And look at what he did with Geno Smith last season. They add Jackson Smith and Jigba this year as another weapon in the receiving core. Seattle is not a team to easily overlook. So that's the layout of the land with respect to the playoffs.
All right, Joey. Okay. And my next,
lost him.
I think we lost him.
He's not pleased with my playoff selections. That's why. So I silenced him, essentially. That's what happened. I didn't pick the Washington Commanders to go to the playoffs. So he's now irritated. I've ruffled his feathers, and now he doesn't want to speak to me anymore. It's okay. I have that effect on people.
Yeah, he's blown away by your opinions and your picks. Yeah. With that being said, with your playoff bracket, who do you have making it to Championship Sunday and the Super Bowl in Vegas?
Well, I like to go a little bit outside the box. So I just want to preface my comments. And remember, the way the NFL works, you can't just say, well, this team was great last year, so it's going to happen again. I have in the AFC, I like the Baltimore Ravens making the AFC Championship game against the New York Jets. That's my AFC Championship game. Wow. And I know I'm going to regret picking against the Chiefs because it seems like every year they find a way. Maybe this is the year that they have a good season, they make the playoffs, and don't have a deep postseason run. I explained earlier why I'm high on the Ravens and the Jets, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but Baltimore and the Jets are two very balanced teams. And those are the types of teams that I look for, where there's balance and there's the ability, Steven, to win in a variety of ways. Meaning, if there's a game where the offense doesn't perform well, you think the defense can fill in the blank. And I think both of those teams meet the criteria. In the NFC, I told you the path is wide open. So this could be the year for a team that gets into the playoffs, but just hasn't been able to overcome and get over the hump. I like the Dallas Cowboys getting to the NFC Championship game and playing the New Orleans Saints, who once again have Derek Carr coming in. I think he's going to quiet some skeptics this year. And I like Dennis Allen on the defensive side of the ball. There's continuity. This is the year. I'll keep my fingers crossed. Michael Thomas stays healthy. They got Chris Olave. They got a lot of weaponry on the offensive side of the ball. And Alvin Kamara is not missing the season. He's only suspended for the early stretch. So I like Cowboys Saints NFC Championship game.
Wow. So with that being said, between those four teams, who are the two teams making the Super Bowl?
I like the Baltimore Ravens against the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl this year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's very
I think Todd
interesting.
Monken, once again, is going to take that Baltimore offense to new heights. And I'm banking on, of course, health. And once again, the Cowboys, all the ingredients are there for that team to put together a deep run this year. And I have said this for the last few years. I'll repeat it again. You can analyze the Cowboys roster all you want. We could sit here, who they lost, who they gained. The best move that the Dallas Cowboys have made each of the last few off seasons has been Dan Quinn not being lost to a head coaching gig and them enticing him to stay on as the defensive coordinator. Because what Dan Quinn has done for Micah Parsons cannot be put into an exact number. Okay, you can't justify that with a number or one statistic. He is huge for the outlook and success of that team. And the fact that he is now back again, and you know what you're going to get out of him, and he knows how to tap into all those players, I think that is significant for the outlook of the Cowboys.
Very interesting. Interesting. I love how outside the box you are with your picks. You're not staying with the popularity pick. You're going against the grain. I absolutely love it.
Well, like I said, I go to NFL history. When you look at the turnover rate in this league, there are so many teams that we just think, oh, they're good for the last 4 years, so it's going to happen again. You got to think about a number of new teams making the playoffs this year. And if you noticed, as I mentioned, 7 new playoff teams in each of the last 3 years. I have 5 new playoff teams for those counting at home, okay? And you got to take that into consideration when you make these playoff predictions. You have to say to yourself, am I thinking about teams that could take a jump, or am I just rolling back 2022 overall again? And if you do that, I'm telling you, you're going to be disappointed. So I've got 5 new playoff teams out of the 14 field this year.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. Joey? He's blown away.
Well, I'm telling you, he's still annoyed that I picked Washington not to make the playoffs and the Cowboys to go to the Super Bowl. So you know I wasn't going to win his vote of confidence under these circumstances. It's understandable.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And my final question for you, Lance, is, and this has been a big discussion in the offseason as far as the running back, issues, as far as them not getting paid. And this has been my argument. Now, I know the running back's lifespan in the National Football League is not very long, unlike, if a quarterback can stay healthy, or kickers and stuff like that can stay healthy, or even some receivers or defensive players can stay healthy. But my argument has always been, if you're going to pay a star quarterback, a star wide receiver, or any defensive player, good money, then in my opinion, the running backs like Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley, who all three in the last 3 years for their respective teams have had very impactful seasons. And Jacobs and Barkley last year were the reasons why the Giants and the Raiders respectively won respective games. I mean, Josh Jacobs had that 80-yard touchdown in overtime, first play from scrimmage of overtime last year. And just those three running backs are incredible athletes. And in my opinion, Tony Pollard as well. I mean, Tony Pollard is just electric for the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, he can do screens and he can go deep sometimes, and he's a very good runner, and he's got that elusive speed. And just in my opinion, the running backs should be getting paid better than what they are getting paid. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. Some of them are not typical running backs, which is what you outlined. They're weapons. Like Christian McCaffrey is a weapon because he's utilized as a receiver as much as he is as a runner. But there are other running backs that, in fairness, are just your conventional guys out of the backfield who are limited in terms of their versatility. And GMs are going to say, I'm not going to take a good portion of my salary cap and put it towards a player who I may have to take off the field on third down, and I'm not getting a lot of bang for my buck, and in all likelihood, they're going to get hurt. It'd be very hard to see a running back in today's NFL that's going to be able to suit up for all 17 games. So do I want to see them try to earn as much as possible? Sure. I mean, every football player should be in that position, but the salary cap and the economics of the game and the union not prioritizing the franchise tag, that's what's hurting them. It's not GMs and teams going out of their way and saying, oh, let's find a way to screw the running back. It's the fact that if the franchise tag is $10 million, Stephen, then why should a team go out and pay a running back $15 to $16 million a year? Right. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because you're saying the bar is set at 10 million. If the elite guys, if Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, if they get 10 million, and I know Barkley and Jacobs got slightly more with their new deals, then a guy like Miles Sanders, for example, he's not going to get more than that because that's the ceiling. So Miles Sanders is impacted by the franchise tag. But those guys, they don't see it that way. That's why the union hasn't prioritized the tag, because they think, oh, about maybe 10 guys every year get tagged. Well, there's hundreds of players in the union. We have to now prioritize issues that affect everybody, not just necessarily 10 guys per year, but they have to come to the realization, no, even guys that are not tagged get hurt because the bar is set by the franchise tag. So until that changes, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day whether or not I think running backs should get paid more, because GMs and owners are simply going to look at the economic structure and they're going to say, hey, if this is as much as we have to pay, so be it. I also think the injury level at that position is what hurts the running backs from getting more money, because in the case like Jonathan Taylor, for example, you draft him in the second round, you get him for 4 years on a rookie deal, and then you franchise tag him for the next 2 years, and then you start the cycle all over again. Also, remember, Jonathan Taylor, he was the starting running back for Wisconsin for 3 years. In each of those 3 seasons, he had minimum 299 carries. So when you think about it, Jonathan Taylor is not entering year 4 of his NFL career. You have to look at the 3 years he played at Wisconsin on top of the rookie deal. By the time he gets to free agency, the point is he's really logged 7 years of being a starting running back. And who in their right mind in the NFL is going to say year 8 is going to be better than year 5 for this guy? They're not going to think like that. So that also hurts. It's almost as if they need to have a new rule, and this will never happen, to allow running backs to enter the NFL draft sooner rather than later. But once again, that's not going to happen. And they're also not going to say, okay, rookies who get drafted, who play the running back position, only get 2-year contracts. Everybody else can get locked up for 4 or 5 years. They're not going to do that, because quarterbacks are going to turn around and say, well, wait a minute, I want to hit free agency in 3 years. Why is that only true for the running backs? You're going to divide the union. So the economic structure and the CBA, that's the real hurdle for the running back position.
Right. And just to add to that real quickly, that's like Christian McCaffrey, like he pointed out. He had a great year last year after getting traded to San Francisco. And let's just say after last year and also this year, if Christian McCaffrey comes out there and is the dynamic player that he is, running the ball, catching the ball, and just being a dynamic player, if he has a great year again, he, just like you said with Barkley and with Pollard and Jacobs, he's not going to, even though if he has a great year, he's not going to get paid. Because, like you said, the cap for the running back is not what it used to be.
And that's why I go back to, if running backs want to move the needle, they have to talk to the union. The problem is there's 7 more years left on the current collective bargaining agreement. So good luck trying to get any massive changes done from an economic standpoint. If anything, it's the generations that are in high school now, they may reap the rewards of how the structure changes, because nothing's going to happen, I think, within the next few years.
Interesting. And Lance, we want to thank you for coming on here and previewing and breaking down the NFL season. And it's just about to begin, everybody. And we always enjoy every time you come on this show and give your honest, opinions on, sports and stuff. And you're a great guy. You're great at what you do. And I love listening to you every Saturday, every Sunday on Mad Dog Sports Radio in the morning. And I look forward to every time you're on the air, because you break it down and you keep it 110% real.
Well, Steven, I greatly appreciate you having me on the program, as well as you, Joseph. Thanks so much. I appreciate the kind words, and I certainly value you listening on a consistent basis. It's always enjoyable to talk football and sit down with you guys, and let's hope for an entertaining season and something that gives us plenty of great content to consume and discuss here moving forward. So thank you very much for having me on the program here today. Appreciate it.
Yes. And with that being said, for our listeners and viewers out there, where can everybody find you on your social media platforms?
Well, they can follow me on Twitter at Lance Medow, one word, last name, and the spelling is important, Medow. Other than that, not much else to promote. I promote everything on my Twitter account. So if they want to find me, that is the best outlet to turn to, because I keep everybody posted with respect to my comings and goings.
That is right. And we look forward to having you on once again down the road, and keep up the amazing work as you always do, my friend. And with that being said, you can follow us on Twitter at @ON_Sports Show, Facebook.com/Nation Sports Show, and where we are live on YouTube every single Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, 4 p.m. Pacific time, YouTube.com/Nation Sports Show. For Joseph Thornton, I have been your host for this evening with this interview with the great Lance Medow, Stephen Wyand. We are out, and the NFL season on September 7th begins. Take care, everybody.
Turn me up.